by Pratt & Whitney engine issues. But Spicejet too has been grappling with financial headwinds and announced a raising of 2,250 crore lifeline last week. So one cash-strapped airline trying to buy the other. Karthik Malhotra with me here in the studio. Karthik, what sense does it make? What business sense does it make for Spicejet at the moment to buy out GoFirst?
Look, Shweta, I think it definitely makes business sense because Spicejet in itself has a much smaller market share as compared to the two real big airlines that dominate Indian skies. One, of course, being the entire might of Air India, which includes Air India, Air Asia, Air India Express, as well as Vistara. And the other being Indigo, by far the largest single company when it comes to skies, dominating skies in India. So Spicejet obviously has a great business case when it comes to buying out an airline which is bankrupt, which is grounded, and take possession of the aircraft, take possession of the staff that GoFirst continues to have on its books, and by way of doing that increase its own ability to carry more passengers and its own ability to command a much higher market share than it presently does. But the challenge really is, where is the money? Because Spicejet itself has been struggling to raise cash. Now, it could be possible perhaps that when Spicejet goes to its lenders or looks at other investors to come into its own business, they may not be very enthused by the prospect of a low-cost airline with a small market share, cash strapped, of course, by investing more money into that airline surviving in isolation. But there might be interest from investors or from lenders, as the case may be, when the business plan includes picking up stake of another airline and overall increasing its market share. Now, the point is, who's going to invest in Spicejet, and will it really be able to raise the amount of money?
Who will be the lenders? I think that remains a big question.
Absolutely. So Spicejet, to keep itself afloat and to keep its own daily operations running, is looking at raising about $270 million or so. So that amounts to what, I think 2,800 crore rupees or something as per reports. Now, is that going to be sufficient infusion in Spicejet to also pick up another airline? Obviously not. So it is going to have to look.
And we also don't know the value of GoFirst at the moment, do we?
It seems, no, we don't know the value of GoFirst, but it seems that after formally expressing interest to buy GoFirst, that is when the due diligence will have to be done by Spicejet, and it'll really have to look at the books and try and estimate a fair value, and then that fair value will also get negotiated, and the arbiter there is going to be the resolution professional who will try and maximize the value of the airline for a bidder to help the promoters of GoFirst, get as much as they can, juice out as much as they can from the bankrupt airline. But Spicejet will also have to do its own negotiations after its due diligence and try and find the best value to pick up stake, if not pick up a complete majority stake in GoFirst.
I think the question that a lot of viewers will have in mind right now is, what is there to pick up in GoFirst? We know that half of their fleet is currently grounded, other half is not operable. With half the fleet of GoFirst, will that be enough for a combined entity to perhaps stick to skies and dominate and maybe challenge the existing players? So what value does GoFirst have at the moment?
That's a difficult question to answer, Shweta. I think the simple point is that it is difficult to estimate the value of an airline, especially one that has been grounded for almost 9 months now, 8 months plus now, and estimate at a fair value when the aircraft actually does not possess any aircraft.
Absolutely.
They're all leased by the lessors, as the case may be, and 50% of those aircraft are unfit to fly. Now, the second point really is that you have, of course, in addition to this very opaque, very ambiguous sort of a value of the airline, you also have litigation costs. You also have the liabilities, which in any case GoFirst is struggling to keep pace with, and that additional loan that was supposed to come from the committee of creditors hasn't come in. So there is, of course, grounded, unserviceable fleet of aircraft,
the
no
2,000
assets
employees.
really. And then, of course, the employees and the other costs associated with acquiring the airline. But the other point is that, you still have a brand, you still have trained staff, you still have a license, and you have a license and additional license, maybe a sub-variant of or a sub-brand or Spicejet, Spice Go or something could be, a new brand. But you do have the GoFirst brand, you still have pilots, you still have the ground staff, you still have the crew, and you will then at least possess those 26 aircraft back, which may have to go through another round of overhauling, servicing, etc., and have your fleet at least expand by another 26 aircraft until those unserviceable, faulty Pratt & Whitney 26 aircraft get new engines or serviceable engines.
All right, so a mega entity perhaps in making if this deal goes through, and that is if Spicejet clears the deal. It is currently negotiating.
But I think it's still going to be a long drawn process, because
absolutely.
it'll start with an expression of interest. That is when the books would be opened up to Spicejet. Spicejet would want to look at the numbers, crunch them, negotiate a good value. If at all they do go ahead and intend to make a proposal. We saw what happened last time around. In the nick of time, the proposal did not come through.
Absolutely.
And add to that, Spicejet is not alone. You've got two more players, in fact, two international players who also seem to be in the fray. You've got Sharjah-based Sky One, and you've got an African player called Safric. And both of these also seem to be expressing some sort of an interest. If not formally, then at least there is enough news that these two players are also seriously looking at contending for GoFirst.
Right, so three players in the fray at the moment to buy GoFirst. You cannot write the GoFirst story off just as yet. GoFirst could likely see a lifeline coming its way by the three players who are expressing some sort of interest to buy the existing airline, which is currently facing bankruptcy proceedings. But shifting focus to another story that is not looking very good, which is the Zee-Sony merger, seems to have hit another roadblock. This could be a make or break for the deal. Now, Zee Entertainment has requested Sony Pictures Network India to postpone the effective date of their merger, but Sony is not agreeing to the deadline extension. Sony India in a statement said that it wants to hear Zee's proposal first before deciding on an extension. In fact, Zee had made the plea for extension on 17th of December, just 4 days before the agreed cutoff date of 21st of December. 21st of December was initially set as the deadline for both entities to merge, the $10 billion merger which was announced way back in December of 2021. Now, despite overcoming regulatory hurdles, Zee's request of trying to defer the merger date has led to heads rolling, especially in the light of emerging reports that indicate that there is a disagreement between the two entities over the appointment of chief executive of the newly merged entity. All is not looking well as far as Zee-Sony merger is concerned. Another roadblock, but this could be a defining pivotal moment. This comes just days ahead of that merger, when the merger was expected to go through.
And we've got exactly 2 days left, Shweta, for the merger to actually go through if both parties do not agree to extend the timeline. Now, like you've mentioned, Zee wants to push the timeline from December 21st, and some analysts expect that even if the dates were to be renegotiated, you could still look at perhaps April of 2024 as a likely date for the merger to go through. Now, April, of course, is also not too, way long from where we are sitting right now, another quarter or so. But the only question is Sony going to agree to it or not? But the point is, Sony has also stayed invested in this deal, in this partnership for more than 2 years now. So just for not wanting to agree with Zee's demand or Zee's request to extend the deadline by another couple of months, I don't think Sony will be wise to walk out of this deal right now. Sony has invested enough time, enough patience, enough regulatory hurdles, and all of them have actually received the green tick from multiple agencies. First, it was the Competition Commission of India, then it was NCLT, NCLAT. There was SEBI in between, which had barred Puneet Goenka from taking a managerial position, top management position in a listed entity. Even that got pushed aside by the appellate tribunal. So overall, you see that over these last 2 years, there have been many hurdles, but this partnership, and there were rumors also in between that Sony may walk away, Sony may not want to continue. There were talks in between that Sony is keen to appoint its current India head as the CEO and the managing director of the merged entity, and not Puneet Goenka, but Puneet Goenka received his own green signal to be appointed by the SAT. So overall, there have been enough and more regulatory challenges, legal challenges, etc., which both the partners to be, rather, hopefully to be, have been able to tide over. Now, Sony will, of course, want to see what is the kind of rope extension that Zee is asking for. It cannot be an infinite rope, because Sony will also, and being a being a forthright sort of Japanese company, it is unlikely to to have an infinite deadline. But I think just for a couple of more months, it'll be foolhardy on Sony's part to not agree to an extension.
Absolutely.
Now, will Zee be okay to expedite matters on its own end and have something which can be meaningful for both the entities roll out quickly? I think it should be. We are talking about a $10 billion deal. We are talking arguably India's largest TV and OTT network being built through this partnership. We are talking about 70 on-air channels, and we are talking two large apps, which is the Sony Live app and the Z5 app in the OTT space. So, and libraries merging of both entities, enough and more Indian content to reside in India. So, I think overall the deal should go through. Sony should agree to the extension if the extension is not too long a rope.
All right, so if extension is not too long, but we don't know for how long, because Zee essentially has not given a deadline just as yet on what their proposal is. But Sony, the mega deal, will it stumble over a obstacle versus all the hurdles it has solved in a matter of last couple of months? We don't know, but we'll come back in just a short bit.
Hello everyone, Namaskar. I'm music composer Ricky Cage. Three-time Grammy Award winner and a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador. And you're watching me on First Person on News9 Plus.
This and more streaming now on the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey trap top civil and military officials. Counter honey trapping ops initiated by India. But gullible victims still caught in the web. Top military intelligence experts break down the web of deception. Colonel Hani Bakshi explains the phenomena of honey trap.
जहाँ पे भी आपको लगेगा, उनको लगेगा कि there is a person who is susceptible to women, who's making a lot of women friends on the social media. That is where they will make a spoof account and then start luring the person.
Colonel Pavitran Rajan decodes the psyche of the victim and the predator.
But when you go up the chain, no one enforces it to people at the top. That disciplinary regime and the security regime is not enforced at the top. And they usually have a public profile where it is much more easier to approach that person.
A News9 special on how modern technology has added teeth to the ancient spying tactic.
Our story takes you inside Pakistan's honey trap machine.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा.
There is certainly a wall of capital coming into the clean tech, climate tech space, not just in India but across the world.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. A recently released report by Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council member and economist Shamika Ravi has thrown up interesting highlights on state budget trends. The report highlights some encouraging as well as troubling aspects of state budget over the course of last 30 years. For example, interest payment has been consistently high and much above all state averages for the state of Kerala, West Bengal and Punjab. The development expenditure of states and in comparison to their non-development expenditure is least in Kerala and Punjab. The good news, however, is the share of development expenditure remains more than 50% for all large states, except of course, as I mentioned, for Punjab and Kerala. It is a good mix of the data points coming in by the way of that report. Joining us on the show is Vivek Kumar, economist at Quantico. Vivek, thank you very much for taking time out. What are the big highlights of that story?
Yeah, sure. So the highlights are plenty. It's a timely report because the budget season is almost upon us. And although it is not about the central government, it is about state government. But nevertheless, I guess it's a good wake-up call because there are important issues highlighted. One is the composition of the revenues among states. So which state is more dependent upon its own revenue? Typically, you see states which are doing good in terms of growth performance. Their dependence on central grant for their total revenue collection is relatively lower, which is a good sign, which tells you that these the important states which are generating more growth on their own, their reliance is lesser on the central grant. The second aspect which I found interesting was the divide between development expenditure and capital expenditure. Typically, states which are doing good in terms of, I mean, you would expect that also to happen because states which are doing good on revenue collection have more wherewithal to spend on both development expenditure as well as the capital side of disbursement. Now, it's an individual state's call whether to divert expenditure between development expenditure or capital expenditure. I guess at the end of the day, both are development oriented in nature. It's just the color of the development that one has to choose depending upon what is the point of origin, what is the political climate, what is the need for the citizens of that particular state. So the needs and political climate depends and varies from one state to another. And I think last but not the least is that it definitely does touch upon the fact that it would be by and large detrimental for states to revive the old pension scheme if they were to choose to do so. So this is detrimental from a fiscal health perspective, not detrimental from, let's say, from the benefits that it would accrue to some of the citizens. But from a fiscal health perspective, I think it's clearly showing that this is a strategy which is not sustainable in the longer run.
Hi Vivek, Karthik here. Thanks for joining us today. Good to see you after a while. Yesterday we had a chance to speak to the former finance minister of Kerala, and this was Mr. Isaac Thomas. He was on our show yesterday evening, and his observation was, and this is something I want to throw off you and get your perspective, his observation was that while this trend historically over the last 30 years has shown that in the state of Kerala, the debt has been much higher than many other states, he's saying that it is actually not unsustainable and quite likely to reverse because there is money going back into the state's development. However, there doesn't seem to be much action taken on the ground. Now, in the case of Kerala and in the case of West Bengal, we have obviously seen that these have been states which have largely been led by communist parties in the past, and there hasn't been much industrialization. But what do you make specifically of a state like Punjab, which again might not have been as industrial, though there are pockets of industrialization in Punjab when it comes to Jalandhar, Ludhiana, etc., but largely been an agrarian state. So going forward, what is the potential for these states to actually reverse this trend?
I think the best strategy for them would be to rev up growth, and that will to some extent take into consideration what kind of revenue consideration that these particular states you're talking about, whether it's Kerala, whether it is Punjab, or whether it is any other state. But primarily, I think the answer to, if you have to get out of the debt trap, I think growth is the foremost option that you have as a policymaker. The second is obviously inflation. So if you can generate inflation in a certain moderate way, so I'm not saying that you start, I'm not propagating that you should start aiming for a very high inflation, because then it will have a detrimental impact on your fiscal health as such, but a moderately high inflation. So let's say if the country is targeting 2 to 6% inflation band, then if the particular state can have inflation in the upper end of the inflation targeting band, which by and large would still remain within the target band for the center, would help generate a little bit of cushion from a debt sustainability perspective. So first would be growth. Second would be slightly higher amount of inflation vis-a-vis the national average. And last but not the least would be to avoid any sort of recklessness as far as the fiscal health is concerned.
So I think the allegations, Shweta, in the social media and generally people that we are speaking to has also been that states which have taken a higher debt from the central government, it's not just the fact that they end up paying more interest to the central government, but it's also the fact that this money taken has actually not gone into industrialization, rather it has gone into distribution of freebies for the large section of the population within the state. The other side of the story also is that these states have actually not been industrial in nature, and hence their own development is going to take much longer, and that length of development will only come by way of continuity in the state government, and that continuity will come only if you give the SOP. So I think this dichotomy is something which sort of becomes a checkmate situation, and states are unable to get out of.
You know, very interestingly, as Vivek pointed out, growth in itself is a parameter on the basis of which you can judge a development of a state. So when you talk about a state like Kerala, even where non-development expenditure is far higher as compared to other states, a growth rate consistently of 6.3% over the course of last 10 years in itself speaks about kind of policies that the government is rolling. It is an indicator perhaps of the economic growth and progress, even though the state is not industrial in nature for that matter.
To my limited understanding of this, Shweta, and I think Vivek would be able to answer this better, but I feel Kerala also being a state which has a large population of foreign remittances coming into the state, especially from the Gulf, especially from oil producing nations, especially from countries where the demand for nursing is much higher.
Fair enough.
Could be one of the key contributors to the state GDP in the overall GDP formula. I think this foreign revenue coming into, or forex coming into the state, could be one of the key factors for Kerala outshining. But
okay,
for
but
a
when
state
you
like
compare,
Punjab,
for example, a West Bengal with a UP, a West Bengal growing at an average rate of 4.4%, more than UP growing at an average rate of 4.1%, what does it tell you? It tells you that even though the state is not pushing for industrialization, it is anti-capitalist, socialist in a way, as you pointed out. The development rate is still far higher. I mean, I think we would like...
Absolutely. And add to that Punjab, which is pretty much the wheat basket of India and has its own little townships and its own clusters of SMEs, is still growing only at about 4.2%. So I think interesting dichotomy in this data.
All right. Vivek, you know, I want to pick your brains, of course, on the fact that Shamika Ravi in her tweet has also highlighted why it's a growing concern that the non-development expenditure of some of these states is less than 50% of the total state's expenditure. Are you concerned with that indicator?
Well, for some states, yes, it is a concern, but states put together, I think, as far as the non-development expenditure is concerned, states put together as doing good. So if I have to take a, let's say, a slide view of how the central fisc is looking and how the cumulative state fisc is looking, then in most of the parameters, I guess the cumulative state fisc is doing better than the central fisc. Now, here there is a dichotomy, because the cumulative state fisc has a lot of divergence between the good states and the bad states. So, for example, Kerala you pointed out earlier, and Punjab you also pointed out as being two states. So Kerala stands out as being one of the states which probably has the higher growth rate vis-a-vis the national average across 2 decades. So we are comparing, I think essentially the study looks at the 2-decade period, and in the last 2 decades Kerala has outperformed the national average, whereas Punjab has not. The one observation for me which kind of stands out in this case is that states which have high dominance of services will tend to outperform in this period, because 2000 to 2019, we're looking at this 2-decade period, was a period for boom in case of services growth in India. This was the period when the IT sector took off. IT sector took off in late 90s, but the fruits started to bear in the 2000s. And 2002 thereafter 2010, you also had the sector of the telephone and the mobile sector taking off in a big way. So services sector dominated the national landscape and the economic landscape, and states which have this dominance will tend to outperform states which have a more traditional industrial dominance. So Punjab would be much more industrialized than Kerala. It is doing badly vis-a-vis growth rate, vis-a-vis, I guess, overall fiscal state is concerned. Similarly, I think if you look at some of the other states like, West Bengal also traditionally has been an industrial state. Also, there has, of late, West Bengal has suffered more on the deindustrialization front rather than the industrialization front. But traditionally, West Bengal has been one of the more industrialized states in India. So there also you'll see growth rate being lower and the pressure on fisc also being lower. So, or pressure on fisc, sorry, on the contrary, being on the higher side. So for me, I think I would also look at it from this perspective as to what kind of business cycle are we looking at, because this was the period in which the business cycle was completely different than the business cycle that existed in 1980s or 1990s.
All
so
right.
yes, and as we move forward, I guess in the immediate term, if we are looking at the next 3 to 5 years, the dominance of service sector is likely to continue. Now, if you have to take a very long term, so let's take a 20-year term, then probably you could start arguing that with the focus on industrialization, on manufacturing policy, focus on PLIs, focused on national infrastructure policy, there would be states which traditionally are more industrial in nature and they would probably tend to gain more. So you could again have winners and losers in the short term as well as long term, which could be completely different from each other.
All right, and before I let you go, I think to break down all the complex graphs that we are seeing on our screens, if you could name 5 states that are doing extremely well and 5 states that really need to buck up come financial year 2025, which of these states would be?
I think it's probably not very difficult, but for me, I think the poster boys would be Gujarat, Maharashtra, to some extent Telangana, and Karnataka. I think I've named 5.
Tamil Nadu?
And Tamil Nadu, yes.
Okay.
So Delhi is also not doing badly as far as fisc is concerned. So Delhi also would probably make that cut. The laggards would be the traditional ones like Bihar, Jharkhand, UP to some extent, Assam. So basically, more dominance towards the east is where you'll find the laggards, and the outperformers you'll have a little bit of pocket exists in north, whereas a dominant pocket exists in case of west and south. So if I can give you that color, I think you'll get your answer.
All right, and with Punjab and Kerala are very interesting outliers in a way, but also don't find them mentioned either in developing, least developed or developed states for that matter. Vivek Kumar, thank you very much, sir, for bringing all those details. Thank you for joining us here on News9.
Thank you so much.
And with that, it's a wrap on the show. Up next is News9 special documentary on 27th of October 2023, The World Awakened to a New Crisis. It's a new turn in a 70-year-old civil war, one that gave implications for not just India, but also threatens regional stability in Southeast Asia. News9 examines the mayhem in Myanmar.
On October 27, 2023, the world awakened to a new crisis. A new turn in a 70-year-old civil war.